fixes? How's it going to go?
I think that this is pretty easy setup overall, especially at Workshop. I mean, after they changed Quaking in 8.3 to only deal damage if you're cleaving an ally, it's been really easy for everybody to deal with, and especially when we're seeing Triple Hunter come out on either side here, Nagura.
Yeah, I mean, Triple Hunter for both sides, I mean, it's a very similar dungeon to King's Rest, right? Very single target focused, even though it is Fortified and Teeming, it's still just a straightforward dungeon. You have just go from boss to boss, basically, not that much AoE going on, and that's why we probably see this very single target heavy lineup from both of those teams, as they both finished off that first trash group and they're now waiting for the boss to spawn.
That's right, and no mercy in the Platinum Pummeler. They're waiting for all the RP and everything to get all set, and as you can see, everybody's stacking up behind the boss to make sure they're baiting into these hammers. So whenever the Platinum Pummeler gets hit by the hammer, it actually breaks it. So they have to leave Rads and Fem respectively running around the room, breaking the Platinum Pummeler's armor, while everybody just absolutely lays into no mercy here. 60% there HP on the side of the boys, as Pain for Fem isn't too far behind as they're waiting on another slam.
Yeah, so interesting to see that Quaking can actually cause some issues here on this boss, because you want the whole team to stack underneath the hammer, because the more people bait the hammer or are underneath, the more damage the hammer is going to do to the actual boss. But if you get a bad Quaking timing, you cannot stack underneath the hammer, because you need to actually run apart so you don't kill each other. And therefore, if you get a bad timing, you can actually lose out on a little bit of damage here from the hammer.
Yeah, most definitely. And even on a 19 scenario, we're seeing the vent jets coming out, still dealing a ton of damage to the group there. So they do a good job, both teams, getting no mercy down very quickly as the Platinum Pummeler is about to fall as well. And we were talking about the compositions before here, Nagura. There's just so much power in the Hunter with a single target and focus going through it, and they just absolutely obliterated this boss. And that kind of is what makes me excited for both of these teams. They've done such a great job being able to adapt and really start coming into their own on multi-classing and on learning some of the strategies to start getting into these higher level rankings and higher level seeding as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, all of those people, they got so good at multi-classing. In the past, we've seen some of those players stick to their main class or maybe try a different kind of comp just because they're comfortable with it. And you know, historically, it never really worked out as well as playing that meta comp as we've seen from the top teams. And now that they're adapting as well to this new meta comp, at least we think it's a new meta comp, or they think it's a meta comp. We don't know yet. Sure. Maybe a mage is still better here in Workshop, right? But in the end, I like seeing them adjust their comps depending on what the other teams do and depending what they think is best.
Yeah, I mean, I rewind to a year ago, for example, right? The boys, they were playing what they were playing basically on live servers, you know? Bob was playing his Ard Druid, and Chaya was playing Demon Hunter more often than not, and Eladra was playing Rogue more often than not. Petco would do a little bit of multi-classing for the group, right?
Yeah.
But we didn't really see these big shifts in what were they going to be doing for multi-classing. I mean, look at on the side of Pain for Fem with Shella. You know, Shella was usually the one who was pushing to be on the side of, I'll be the first one to start multi-classing. I'll be the first one to start trying to adapt to something new. And, you know, he's taking to Hunter like a fish in water right now, as he's just been absolutely tearing up the meters on their side every time I look over at Pain for Fem.
Yeah, well done by both of those teams, as the boys actually engaged Cujo slightly earlier with the trash, so they're slightly ahead in boss damage. You see Bob actually dropping a little bit low as he got the last AoE actually from Cujo's AoE ability here. Well, Pain for Fem were dealing a little bit with the trash before they engaged the boss to be a little bit safer. And Bob going down actually, and the ladder going down too. They do have one battle rush available to get Bob back up if they want to, but yeah, they're gonna have to four-man this boss.
Oh, that is absolutely disastrous. Raz going down as well. They weren't able to get the res off, and the boys are going to be having their first wipe right now in Workshop. This Chaya is just going to try to stay alive onto this one, and at this point they're just kind of burning more time that you really hate to see. Pain for Fem ready to take advantage of it, as the boys had a slight lead going into this, and I was going to talk about how I really liked how they were dealing with the trash and dealing with the living waste as well, because whenever they die, they detonate. So they sort of stutter-stepped and kept using line of sight to their advantage. But now the boys are having a tough deficit in what's usually a really quick dungeon.
Yeah, I mean, this is a horrible wipe for them. Such a big time loss, even if it's not that tyrannical environment, still just huge amount of time that you're losing here. As Pain for Fem is already on 7%, they're about to finish up this boss and they can move on. I'd say this is at 2 minutes advantage now for Pain for Femme. So the boys have to make up a lot of time here.
Yeah, I love that positioning as well. We got a good close-up on the side of Pain for Femme where the Hunters were still shooting even though they were hanging out beside the box or behind the box to get away from Cujo. So there's actually a couple spots that you're able to still DPS the boss as long as it's close enough and kind of like having the brunt of its body inside the box that those Hunters can continuously be DPSing. It's a lot of extra damage, especially when you're able to have your pet on the boss the entirety of the time. And we're seeing it on the side of the boys right now too. They're just kind of weaving back and forth, so they're able to continue pumping a bit of extra damage. And when these teams are this close to each other as well, Nagura, it just seems like you have to do every little thing possible to get an advantage.
Yeah, and it's not Tyrannical, so I think even if you get hit by one of the ticks of the explosions of the AoE, I think you don't go down immediately as long as you're not low HP. So it's not as risky here. Of course, it's a lot riskier if it's Tyrannical and you just completely get one-shot by one of those AoEs. Then you really want to make sure that you're in the correct spot to do this kind of damage to the boss. But the boys are doing it correctly now. They don't have any more deaths. And one thing I wanted to mention as well is this is the disadvantage of not running a Battle Res class, right? If they had a DK or a Druid or a Warlock who could get them up immediately after Bob went down, it probably would have been able to recover. But because they need to use this engineering res, they have to go close to the body, they have to cast it for a pretty long time, and the time was not there, and then res just went down.
Yeah, it's very interesting looking at some of the different utility tools, having intellect or battle shout scrolls that are not too much worse than the real thing, right? Having the bloodlust drums, not too much worse than the real thing. But when it comes to battle reses, it's much more punishing, I guess you could say. Yeah. It's much more difficult to be able to properly use compared to a regular battle res option, because you have to stand on top of them, and like you said, it's such a long cast that you're completely vulnerable, right, at the very end of it. But it's also, that's something that they're signing up for, not having the battle res. Only 3 classes out of 12 have it, right? Yeah. So there's a lot of extra. Come on, Bob, you got this. Hey, there we go.
We actually just had a nice point of view on Pain for Femme's side, as all 3 Hunters were outranging the AoE from this mini-boss here. If you have a long range as a caster, you can just go all the way into the corner and you don't have to move on the AoE at all. Now, they are Hunters, so they don't actually lose damage from moving, but it's still nice to see they're just, not risking anything, just in case someone wouldn't make it.
I thought you were going to say, oh, they're Hunters anyway, so they don't do mechanics as is.
I would never say such a thing.
Yeah, I know, right? Boomkin's always stuck with the tough jobs.
Oh, yeah. Oh, most definitely.
Pain for Femme blazing their way through the realm of Ny'alotha and getting into an incredibly good snap spot there for the caster obelisk that they have to deal with. But it's also stuck as well, if you look at it right there. They finally got it to teleport down. So one of the weird things that happens is whenever you go into an area with no path available, and as long as the mob isn't casting on you at the moment, it'll snap onto the tank and it'll teleport instantly to the tank there. And one of the problems is that it can sometimes just get stuck if you move a little bit too quickly, and you have to like go back up to it, reestablish that it'll smack you in order to teleport it down. So they did a good job there, and in fact they killed it so quickly, Nagura, that they had to take extra time to start killing any of the little ads that it had spawned.
Yeah, you don't see that very often. Usually the spider is always the one going down last, but they actually had to clean off those ads, as they do a really big pull here with the whole trash, a lot of trash here with Teeming as well, on top of the boss. Now this is very dangerous, just because the boss itself is already dangerous with all this area of denial. You have the beams, you have so many things you need to dodge, and then on top of that you also have the trash that needs to be interrupted, needs to be focused down properly. That's why you see everyone dropping so low, but they're doing a good job, and they're about to finish off this trash pack. But this is why mages are so good here, right? Because this trash pack would down already if they had a mage with combustion.
It's true. Although with Hunters, they're able to just completely redirect themselves and push themselves to wherever the barrier was. We saw Ricky on the side of Pain for Femme just run into the barrier and just start eating a bunch of scythes because they took 75% less damage, 80% less damage from every other source by standing in there. And they're able to really quickly and easily switch targets onto the turrets that'll spawn from this boss as well. So it's a lot of flexibility in their damage into what they want to really focus on at any one point in time. And I really like how this triple hunter has been shaping up for the dungeon, because they're already 65% in on the boss and further extending their lead over the boys.
Yeah, there's so much damage incoming actually. Amiibo is out of mana now at this point. They have to be careful with any more damage that they're taking, because there were so many debuffs on the group, and Miwo couldn't dispel all of them, so he had to out-heal the rest of the debuffs that he wasn't able to dispel, that he ran out of mana, and he was just doing consistently 100k HPS throughout this whole fight up until now. You see some of those ads are even CC'd on the side by the freezing traps here by the hunters, because they can't deal with all of them at the same time. I'm not really sure if they want to maybe play it a little bit safe and finish off the boss first because of the mana situation, and then finish off the rest of the trash, or maybe they even Shadow Melt it.
I think they're just gonna, I was gonna say, I don't think they even need to bother with it. If they wanted to kill it, they would have done it by now. So, but you raised a really good point in terms of Miwo's mana as well, because one of the big things with Mistweavers, oh, Shelly going down.
Yeah, I think it was just too much residual damage here coming in. I think they might have gotten hit by the beam. I think it was Shella and Sabek that got hit by the beam. I'm not really sure. They had a debuff on them. Not sure what it was exactly. Either way, they did go down, but they managed to finish up the boss, so didn't even use a battle rest here to finish off the rest of the fight.
And once again, they're just going to sit and wait, make sure everybody is all together before they'll likely just run up and start taking down a couple of the spider tanks that they have so they can progress on. You are seeing the depth on the side of the boys as Naladra goes down, as they're 50% left on the Machinist. And at this point, they're waiting on him to get up. I guess they still have a very long cast time from any of the engineering battle reses. And it's ridiculously risky, as you're seeing Bob getting the fire debuff because he was forced to stand in there. And since he's running with Dampen right now, he might just be saving it for another one of the larger pulls coming up. But missing out on Diffuse is kind of one of those necessary things from Mistweavers in a lot of MDI. Is you're expecting to get some melee hits on you. You're expecting to be in cleave range all the time. So having something, a defensive that's better for physical damage is really important. And like what you're talking about with Miwo's mana, Mistweavers, especially in MDI, they really can burn their mana down extraordinarily quickly. And they don't always get good times to get regen in. On live servers, for example, you'll be able to have those breaks in between large pulls where you'll pull 7, 8, 9, 10 mobs, and then you'll kind of scale down to 2 or 3 near the end, and you'll be able to start single targeting them and using Spirit of the Crane to regen mana through single target. But with MDI, the pulls are just so rapid that you're using Mana Tea all the time, and if you're not fitting in enough spells, enough abilities in that Mana Tea window, you're going to burn your mana down extraordinarily quickly, and then you're just fighting this attrition battle almost. Try to stay up with enough mana in order to keep yourself going. So that's where we're probably going to see a lot of value out of Lucid Disease on the side of Miwo, and I believe Bob are running it as well. So just trying to get some extra mana. He's actually not running it, so we might be seeing Bob have some more problems with mana. That's always something to watch in the series. Yeah, for sure. I mean, Paper Fan played this trash so fast. I just looked away for 1 second and trash is already dead, as they're now 91%. And this one death, of course, that they had earlier on Shella during the boss fight, not having to commit a battle rest, as they will skip this last trash group, because the rest of the trash they will get from the Awaken mobs. They have 3 Awaken mobs they have to deal with here on the last boss. They have their Bloodlust available, and let's see if they can do it. It's a very difficult pull, even on a non-Tyrannical environment. Without a doubt. And I thought you were going to say they weren't pulling that last trash pack, because that last trash pack is terrifying, and nobody wants to pull it at all. They did, as you mentioned, wait to make sure they have all their CDs back. Everybody was fully topped off. You see the revival going out, dispelling all of the fears from, I think it's Samrek the Beckoner. And now you're just looking at the kite around the room. One of the things I'm kind of scared about, okay, there we go. The hunters are repositioning. One thing I was thinking about was where those hunters are positioning to drop off any of the pools that you would see from the Blood of the Corruptor. Because those pools, they'll go away after maybe a minute or so, or they'll go away when he dies, but you're relying on Fem and Miwo to be in melee most often, making sure they're running out the beam that you'll see from King Mechagon. You cannot elude my targeting systems. So they're not cleaving anybody else, right? But you're seeing how quickly the room is just getting clogged up as Fem is just riding the very edge of the room to try to get away from all of these puddles as they finally bring the Blood of the Corruptor down. Yeah, I mean, that was important that it went down there, because the room really was filled with that area of denial there from that Awaken mob. So good on them for finishing it off, and Fem can actually have some breathing room and some area to move around. We also saw the pets from the hunters taunt off that Spirit Breaker ability from the Tank Buster a lot. So the pets can actually just taunt it, and it will not go in a tank, so it will go in a pet instead. And the pet doesn't actually even go down as long as they have the defensive ready for their pet.
And with 3 hunters, you can taunt a lot
You
of them
always do.
without the Fed going down. So good job by them to actually pull it off, though.
An incredibly good job as well. And you know, you can't really state it enough how important it is for these guys to watch a lot of their positioning. You're seeing, you know, everybody's 360 degrees around the room, but they also have to watch out for any of the 4 magnets that are going out. And once again, I think the hunters are just proving absolutely essential because they're able to pump so much damage into the boss even while he's flying around. And I'm sure, you know, you've experienced it as well whenever you're on live keys where boss goes up, starts flying around, you're the only one doing any sort of damage to it, and you're just like, can we move on to the next phase, please?
Yeah, definitely. This last phase here can be quite dangerous because this big sap does leave a debuff behind. It does quite a bit of damage. Again, it's not Tyrannical, but it still does a lot of damage on a 19. And then if you maybe get a bad Quaking and the healer can't keep you up, it can definitely cause some issues. But the hunters do have their defensives available. At least they have their self-heal available, their acceleration. Turtle not ready on most of them except Shelle, but they should be able to survive as they're also very good. Oh, Shelle?
Seb
going down. He was so close to the magnet. Shelle going really low as well. I'm not really sure. He maybe didn't use his disengage correctly or didn't have any other speed buff to get away from this magnet. But that was a lot of incoming damage right there.
I think he just was really poorly positioned as
Maybe,
well.
yeah.
I mean, he saw the magnet come out, and you take more damage the closer that you are to the magnet. And I feel like he just had sufficient time to reposition himself. But that's one of the things. Whenever you're having everybody at range, you're having all the magnets going all over the place. You don't want to be standing near them, and they even deal a ton of damage on Fortified as well. But they get him up, and Pain for Femme brings down King Mechagon, taking game number 1.
Yep, that is going to be a game 1 victory for Paint for Femme, and we are seeing the boys just starting on that last boss there in Workshop. And one thing I do want to highlight, you guys touched on it a little bit in that matchup, is Shelle and his multi-classing skills. I mean, we've seen him on a Death Knight, a Demon Hunter, a Mage, like basically every class. And,
Warlock.
you know, they are playing this like kind of meta comp with all the BM hunters, and it just seems like the more people you have playing on your alts, the greater that margin of error becomes. And I mean, they were really able to execute this like consistently throughout Workshop. They only had 2 deaths on the board, Jack.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, it really, as they're able to tailor their compositions towards every single dungeon as they get more improved at multi-classing for these setups, it really goes to show how far both of these teams really have come as well, because the boys have been stepping up to their multi-classing game a lot too.
Absolutely. I mean, they did have that one wipe, but they recovered pretty well, Nagura.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, again, wiping on a boss just costs so much time. And even, like, of course, with the wipe, they had no chance against Pain for Femme because they didn't have such a huge time loss, right? But without the wipe, they played just as well as Pain for Femme. So it would have been a very, very close game if this one huge mistake didn't happen for them. Of course, that's what you can say for every match. So the boys definitely needs to make sure they fix their mistakes because having such a big one on a boss, it will cost you the game against almost any other team. So they definitely need to clean that up.
Yeah, there's not too much that, you know, can go wrong in a Workshop with those affixes. So when something big like that does go wrong, it's very, you know, the other team is very often not going to give you an opportunity to make that time back up. So you really got to avoid having that catastrophic wipe come in the way that happened for the boys. That was really all it took for them to be just out of that match, or out of that map, rather.
Yep, for sure. And they ended with 6 deaths. And one thing I also want to talk about, how do we see those teams deal with those obelisks? I mean, it seems like Workshop is kind of like a linear map, Dratnos. How did we see them handle those awakening mobs?
Yeah, they both teams were deciding, you know, we're just going to fight all 4 of these with King Mechagon, and that's that strategy. You know, it has its risks, and we saw some deaths coming in on that boss fight. Although I'm not sure how much that is necessarily because of, you know, the fact that they were fighting 4 awakened enemies. It looked like there were just maybe some sloppiness going on the boss fight from a couple different sources. So it may have been due to the awakened enemies for at least that first one, but. Yeah, you know, with that triple hunter composition, I think it really is a comp that's it looks like it's very doable to fight 4 awakened enemies with those, you know, hunters. They're so good at it.
Yeah, and moving forward, as are so well utilized from both teams here on the boys and Paint for Femme. And moving on, we're going to be playing Motherload. Do we think that they're going to change up their composition at all, or are we going to stick to what we saw on that first map with Workshop?
I mean, I think we're still going to see a lot of Hunters just because it's Bolstering. Now, usually on Motherload, you see a lot of Death Knights because you just do those huge pulls and you just AoE everything down. But with Bolstering, Motherload becomes a very, very dangerous dungeon because you have so many different HP pools there, especially with the Peacekeepers, having so much more HP than the rest of the mobs. So you want damage dealers that are good at focus target damage, and that's just Hunters again. So I think we're still going to see a lot of Hunters.
Yep, and it sounds like Dratnos, you have something you want to break down from that last match with those Hunters for us.
Yeah, well, so I got a little bit of replay for us here. Really, the kind of the turning point of this match, of course, was the map rather was the wipe for the boys on Cujo there. Really brutal turn of events that came around for them, and I think that pretty much entirely, aside from that, the two teams would have been very much neck and neck the entire dungeon. But that wipe set back the boys just so much time, as we've already discussed many times before in the cast. Then the real point where Paint for Femme could have lost it still was that end boss pull with those 4 awakened enemies. But they were able to execute that. I wouldn't say it was perfectly cleanly, but it was cleanly enough that they were able to, use their battle reses. And that's kind of the difference between something that's going to be a wipe and something that isn't, is whether you're able to actually go and, channel that 4-second battle res. And if you can't do that, then it often quickly turns into a wipe if you can't get the person back up within the next 10 seconds or so from their death.
Yep, and Paint for Femme, they do have that one win, and now these two teams are going to be moving on to Motherload, and the affixes that we have with those are going to be Tyrannical, Bolstering, and Grievous. Jack, how do we think these teams are going to handle those affixes on this map?
I think the biggest thing is that we'll be looking a lot on the Hunters to be just lasering down Peacekeepers and trying to make sure that I'd be interested in seeing some of the pulls as to how they're going to be keeping some of the laborers, for example, as far away as possible. Might be seeing some binding shots coming out just to quickly cleave down any of the laborers, get them away from any of the Peacekeepers, trying to split up some of those pulls, for example, because it can be really efficient to kill the Peacekeepers, but when you have to deal with bolstering on top of it, it just makes it go on for such a long period of time as well. So I think the biggest thing that we're going to be looking at is how well people are going to be able to deal with any of the thugs, any of the Peacekeepers, and which mech jockeys are going to also bring to the table. Because it's Tyrannical, so this is usually a favorable dungeon. Usually Motherload and Tyrannical go really well together onto this one, but it's a lot of bolstering management and seeing how much time is wasted or gained by handling it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be all about how big these teams can pull despite the bolstering being active. If teams are able to successfully pull 10, 15 mobs at once and actually execute them all at about the same time for bolstering, or if they're going to have to slow down and split up into smaller pulls. And if one team tries it one way and the other team tries it the other way, we might see a cool risk-reward trade-off going on there.
Yeah, I mean, when these teams are so close, it just, like you were saying, Jack, I think during that last map, it really just comes down to they're doing anything they can to get the victory over the team that they're facing. Because, like we said, these teams are really, really close. That last matchup was the difference between one wipe, basically.
Yeah, and we've seen, again, this is another rematch for these teams as well, and both of them want to be in that spot pressing up against Perplexed or Method EU in terms of competition. And when we start looking at how we sort of compare a lot of these teams together, it seems like the boys in Paint for Femme have had strong starts throughout a lot of their tournament gameplay. And then you start kind of seeing the limitations of how much have they been able to practice, where it's kind of interesting before when we saw Method EU, where they kind of had a slow start in this tournament and in last week's or 2 weeks ago's tournament as well, but then they just really hit their stride later on and were crushing opponents. So I'm curious to see how far the boys and Paint for Femme can really start taking it today.
Yeah, and like you said, this is a matchup. I think it was the boys that won 2-1 against Paint for Femme. Paint for Femme was able to take one map off of them in the first EU Asia Cup, but now they're up 1-0 against the boys. Nagura, do you think this is something that they can finish out this series with a 2-0?
I mean, it's possible. I think because those two teams are so close, in my opinion, anything could really happen. It could go to a 3-game match. It could be a 2-0 for Paint for Femme. I'm not really sure how this Motherload is going to go because it's bolstering, and bolstering, it's so punishing if you make any sort of mistakes. If you accidentally kill something too early and you have a huge Peacekeeper running around, finishing off your tank. So many things can go wrong here, so I think it can go either way. Really, I don't want to choose.
Okay.
First team that wipes loses.
Probably.
Oh, okay. That's probably a fair prediction. Well, along with that, Dratnos and Jack, what do you guys think? Do you think Pain for Fem can pull off a 2-0, or are we going to see maybe this go to a match 3?
I think they would pull off a 2-0 only. I'd say only if the boys make a mistake onto this one. Not that. One team is significantly better than another, but I think right now they have to kind of play against themselves, really, and I think the boys can more than bring it to a 3-game series. I think either team dropping into the lower bracket this early is kind of like a surprise because we know what they're capable of.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we did see the boys
for one team
get to third. So go ahead, Dranos.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say that, for either team, they're not going to be out of the tournament if they lose, but it's all of their wiggle room is going to be gone if they lose this match here, right? They're going to be in that lower bracket, facing elimination matches for the rest of the tournament, facing those unfavorable timings of the lower bracket. So there's really high stakes here in this first match. Even if these two teams, even if we expect whichever team ends up losing here to succeed in the lower bracket, dropping down to that lower bracket is such a penalty that that they're really playing for a lot today.
I mean, when you're in these moments where your back is sort of up against the wall and you're one game away, like boys is one loss away from getting moved down to that lower bracket, do you kind of play what you intended to do? Or are you going to be playing more bolder strategies, Dratnos?
Yeah, that might be the strategy. I think that for the most part they're going to stick with whatever they practice in this dungeon, but the question is how much have they practiced this dungeon, and since it wasn't a time trial dungeon, we don't really know what their 2 times are like, so we have no idea what their strategies are going to look like.
Absolutely. Well, we're seeing both teams start here on MOTHERLOAD. Let's see how this goes for Paint for Fem versus the boys.
That's right, and no surprise, really, we're seeing all the Peacekeepers getting activated left and right for a lot of these teams, but Paint for Fem is just absolutely blitzing through this dungeon, Nagura. It seems like they're just going up to the boss immediately here. Maybe just going for like an early checkpoint or something along those lines, or just trying to grab all of the Peacekeepers they possibly can.
Yeah, we saw a very interesting shroud skip by Pain for Fem for sure. While on the other hand, the boys, they have a huge trash pool and they use their Bloodlust for their pool. As we see Pain for Fem just using a lot of CC and having so many Peacekeepers on top of each other. So I like this strategy because it is bolstering, but we've seen a team do this exact strat before, and it took them so long to finish off those Peacekeepers. So we'll see how long it will take Pain for Fem to finish those off.
Oh, we need to get an aerial view onto this one. I think we have 5 or 6 Peacekeepers. I can't even count. They're all so clumped together. They're just absolutely perfect for these hunters to be able to cleave everything down. And kudos to Fem as well, just being able to sustain surviving through all of the Peacekeepers smashing into them as they are in the boss room for the coin-operated crowd pummeler right now. And they're making some gigantic Peacekeepers. Run, Fem!
Okay, so they actually had very decent even damage on those Peacekeepers. I mean, some of them are really high HP, as you can see right now.
That man is so big.
Yes, but it was actually very close to one another. So well done by them to finish up this pool almost perfectly, actually. 28% trash on the board already as they engage the first boss. While the boys, on the other hand, they used their Bloodlust for their first pull. They got 17% out of their first pull, as they just do more of a standard route on their side. Pain for Fem doing something completely out of the ordinary. I like it.
I absolutely love this, and 28% of their trash taken care of by 6 or 7 Peacekeepers. I'm trying to count the shields to find out how many of them that they racked up there, but absolutely incredible job. They activated those mech jockeys, and I guess because they aggroed all of the enemies first, like the laborers or assassins, for example, and then forced the mech jockeys to all go into the Peacekeepers. When they shadow melded, it was before the Peacekeepers activated, so once the Peacekeepers did activate, they were in combat, and I guess they didn't social aggro anything else, so they just trundled on over to the Pain for Fem side.
Bob
and
going down?
We are seeing a death coming out on the side of the boys as Bob's down, and there's a massive Peacekeeper there.
I hope they can finish this off, because if they wipe here with this hugely bolstered Peacekeeper, they're gonna lose so much time. You see Red's dropping really low with 4 Grievous stacks on him. He has a hard time keeping himself alive here because of that Grievous. He's not getting hit by them, but if he goes down, Naladra also 4 Grievous stacks as he pops his defensives. There we go, they did manage to finish it off. that was so good for them to be able to finish it, because yeah, if you get any of those peacekeepers to reset on very low HP, the amount of time you lose is immense. So well done by them to finish it off, but yeah, not very clean on their side. Again, doing one of these bolstered pulls, not getting the damage properly on all of the ads, having huge mobs, and then people just get one shot by the thug charge.
I think in many cases, what we're seeing out of the boys is sort of like a Mythic Plus key pusher's idea of how you would speedrun it. They say, okay, well, we'll just press W, walk forward, and we'll just do really good single target to be able to deal with everything. And as a result, you have to deal with thugs, you have to deal with a couple of extra mech jockeys as well with their grease guns. You have to deal with a lot of, like, extra tertiary damage, right?
Yeah.
But on the side of Pain for Femme, all they did was round up peacekeepers that only clobber the tank, and nobody should be sitting underneath the boss and getting hit by the charge claw. Debuff as well. They shouldn't be getting hit by the cleave there. So on the side for Pain for Femme, they're really avoiding a lot of this extra damage, and I'm really excited to see how it pays off, because if they get these pulls taken care of, there shouldn't be any extra pressure on the rest of the group.
They're ramping up a big pull here as they actually put all 4 trash groups together. Now there's some CC, we saw some freezing traps come out, and some saps from the hunter as well. So they have the high HP mobs stay behind, and or the low HP mobs rather stay behind, and the high HP mobs they gathered up to AoE down to deal with the bolstering properly. So well done as they finish off this pull. This is such a high damage income in the tank, specifically on this trash pack, as Savik goes down or drops really low by one of these explosions here. But yeah, only an Earthshaper left that is pretty highly bolstered. They should be able to finish it off anyway, and it almost looks like they're just moving forward here. The amount of trash they dealt with before the first boss is very little. They only dealt with the peacekeepers, right? So they have a lot of trash they still need to do. Interesting to see that they just choose to skip the peacekeeper area because of this bolstering efforts.
Absolutely. I mean, it's weird to be like, oh, okay, they're about to go to the second boss. They have 42% trash done. But with Motherload, you do almost all of it before you get to the second boss. And I guess the best way to say it is that they're being extremely surgical with how they're dealing with a lot of the trash in this dungeon. And personally, I love it, because while it often is the most efficient to go after mobs in the beginning, you have to deal with so much random damage and charges and grease guns onto everybody all over the place. So I love this new way of thinking for the dungeon.
I like it as well, and I mean, it's also very difficult because of the shields, as you mentioned, right? If Fem would have turned one peacekeeper the wrong side for one of his shields, then that peacekeeper wouldn't have gotten the damage from the hunters, and then the damage wouldn't have been even, and then you have one guy that is bolstered really high. So it was very difficult to execute, and the way they pulled it, that alone is already difficult, right? To get the Shadow Melt out without pulling the rest of the mobs. So well done by them to get this incredibly difficult pull, just so well done by them. While on the other side, the boys, I mean, they only have 2 deaths on the board, but their strategy, as you mentioned, was more of a like high key strategy, just go pack by pack kind of. And you can see the difference, right? They're 1 boss behind at this point, and they're slightly ahead in trash, but it's only 6% in a non-fortified setting, so that's not that shouldn't be a big deal at all.
Sure. And I think this also really well highlights what makes up a great MDI team as well, is not only having players that are able to perform well, do mechanics well, pump out lots of damage, learn to multi-class, but also people who are very inventive and have that desire to take a dungeon that we've seen for almost 2 years now and say, all right, what are we missing here? How can we do this differently? How can we start changing things up and get only the most efficient packs possible and none of this extra stuff,
Yeah. And again, a different pull by the boys. Now they pulled 2 packs together here. I really like the fact that we saw the CC come out on Pain for Femme, and sometimes we see the high HP mobs just being sapped to the side or CC'd somehow, and then you finish off the low HP mobs, and then you deal with the high HP mobs in case it's a bolstering environment. But what Pain for Femme did, they were CCing the low HP mobs, the rats, because they have a lot less HP than the rest, and then they dealt with everything else. So I really like that. Then they also just Shadow Melted off the aggro because they didn't even want to deal with the other mobs. While the boys, they just pull pack by pack, and they need to make sure they focus target the high HP mobs, which will just take you more time, right? Than to just ignore the small ones, just not even pulling them, and then you can just ignore the focus target and just nuke everything down evenly.
Without a doubt. And Pain for Femme is moving on. Half of the trash is completed, but they're moving on into the research and development wings. We never really see a lot of trash packs getting pulled in here. You have those masterminds, those casters up at the top who are going to be having either void globules that are going to be healing themselves. You're going to see one start tearing through the group right now that's going to be healing them up. And then you also have some of these technicians, I believe that they're called, with the force cannons that need to be stunned, that need to be shut down. Otherwise, they're going to be just knocking everybody back and dealing a ton of damage. So we've seen a couple of times where mobs have been pulled in the research and development wing, but I'd really like to start seeing more of it being used, especially when, even though it's a bolstering environment, they have that extra single target that they're able to crank out at the proper moments, and everything dying almost at exactly the same time is great to see.
Yeah, the boys on the other hand, they're doing a shroud skip here to the boss as they're on 66% now on their side. They're out of battle rests, so hopefully they don't have any deaths here to start. The pull of this boss can be slightly dangerous just because of the fixates from their Earth Ragers here, but 2 of them on the healer is good for them, as the healer of course loses the least amount of damage from having to kite those mobs. So pretty lucky by the boys, as Pain for Femme moving on, just dealing with more trash in this area, and I really like to see this, as you said, just because most of them, they have very equal HP, so this is some very nice trash to kill for Bolstering.
Yeah, they had to take a little bit extra time for any of those test experiments to make sure that they weren't going to be bolstering other mobs. It took a little while for that setup there, but they're making very quick work of a lot of the other packs going onto it, and there's a ton of magic damage with like 2 or 3 blowtorches going off on Femme all at once. So in many of these cases, you know, when we look at bringing a lot of obelisks in with the final boss, when we look at dealing with some of these larger trash pulls, so much of the pressure gets put on the tanks here to make sure they're going to be able to perform and that they're going to be able to get in the right position properly here. So love this. They're stacking all up together with the Blood of the Corruptor and having all of the eye stalks spawning exactly the same position, and they can absolutely make very quick work of it. So very well done on the side of Pain for Femme here. Their execution has been top-notch throughout this dungeon. Yeah,
and this is so important as well, just because the ads in these awakened rooms are actually bolstering as well. So they are affected by bolstering. The blood itself is not, so the awakened mob itself not, just the small ads, the tentacles, the eyes, sorry, are. So if you cleave them down evenly, you need to do a lot less damage to them because you don't bolstering them randomly. So well done as they finish them off, and they also deal with the blood now. It looks like they're also going to pull this trash back here, which has a bunch of masterminds in it as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of masterminds in this, as well as more casters that are setting up behind them. So again, we're just getting to see what these abilities are after not seeing it for a year plus.
Yeah, I think this is just a trash crew I never ever pulled on live servers, I believe. I think almost all of the live server routes are just skipping this trash bag, so it's so interesting to see these guys just not being afraid to pull this. And again, just something they do because of bolstering, because all of these mobs have very similar HP. So as long as you deal with the mechanics properly, you have enough interrupts to deal with all of those dangerous casts you need to not go out, then yeah. Look how fast they dealt with it. So well done by them, as they have 79% trash now. They have their bloodlust available, but it's very likely they're saving it for the last boss with their awakened mobs, and still 0 deaths. So super clean run by Pain for Femme.
Absolutely, and as you saw, they even dropped a fear on a couple of the ads and made sure that they didn't damage them and break that fear so that they would just avoid having any other extra bolsters onto this one. So this looks like a dungeon that they have absolutely mastered at this point, and now that they're moving on to Rixa, it just goes to show how strong of a lead that they're building, because right now, the boys and Pain for Femme are equal in trash percentage, but we are seeing Pain for Femme pulling ahead as they're already working on the boss, while the boys have to be dealing with the Blood of the Corruptor again.
Yeah, and I mean, they're slightly ahead in trash, right? But that's not going to mean much as long as the number of pulls is going to be the same for Pain for Femme. So we'll see how they deal with the trash after Rixa here. Rixa, on a Tyrannical environment, can cause some issues, especially because it is Grievous. So a little bit extra pressure on the healer here. But as long as you spell reflect the debuff properly, and they also have Cloak of Shadows to deal with it, and of course Revival and just single target dispels on Mevo, they should be okay. But we've already seen some tanks struggle here, specifically just because of the amount of magic damage Rixa does.
Without a doubt, and Diffuse Magic also works to be able to remove the debuff as well, so they have a lot of tools to quickly bring her down. And as you're seeing the turtle going up there on the side of Ricky, you know, more ways to immune it, more ways to avoid having to stress the healer as well. And when we're looking at damage as well, it's always really cool to start seeing how the groups are optimizing for that single target. You know, we're seeing on the side of Miwo, for example, spending a lot of his time trying to sort of correct and trying to sort of push extra single target onto the priority, onto whatever is highest HP. We've seen tons of damage come out on other moments where we've seen, for example, big Twilight Devastation out of like tanks, or we've seen, big Way of the Cranes out of the Mistweaver to deal tons of damage. But sometimes with these dungeons and bolstering in effect, it's really about just making sure that you're not having extra bolsterings onto mobs that you don't want to. So transitioning the boss into another pull when they're making sure they're cleaving down the War Machine very rapidly just goes to show how much practice these guys have, and how sometimes a little bit less damage, but more damage in the right target, even though it's less overall, is actually a greater benefit.
Yeah, and I really like this pull here of the War Machine. I think the hunters were jumping on the right side to be able to pull this, because there's a wall that goes up in the middle of the Rixa fight to prevent this kind of thing, but they were just jumping and multi-shotting this War Machine pack on top of Fem. So well done by them to be able to just get a little bit more efficient cleave once Rixa was low HP and there was no worry of them bolstering the boss. As we move on, dealing with some more War Machine packs. Now, these packs maybe not the best packs to deal with during bolstering, just because the War Machine has a lot more HP than the rest of the mobs. But with the Hunters just having so much single target focused damage, they deal with it pretty nicely.
I really like that they're able to grab those War Machines, because not only, yes, they have a lot of HP, but they're very efficient for their count, especially whenever they spawn any of those little bombs that you're seeing spawning right next to Chaya, because they'll give a little bit of extra trash percentage, and there's something that's ridiculously easy to cleave down as well, as we're just seeing every single time one of the ads spawns, they just absolutely obliterate it very quickly. So a little bit of extra trash that they'll be able to get off of the percentage, and you're seeing some very bolstered War Machines, but again, they're going down all so quickly.
Yeah, and the boys, they actually managed to catch up quite a bit here as they're about to go into that obelisk as well. And I mean, they're not that far behind anymore. Of course, they have the 2 deaths, which is a 10-second difference, but outside of that, not a big difference. Looks like the boys are actually going over percentage. They're already on 100% trash while still having to deal with these awakened mobs. So they actually killed a little bit too much here.
Maybe a little bit over on that one, but also looking at like a really inefficient pull there by the boys, where they just had to pull one singular mob to be able to move past. I think it was just a face pull or something. So yeah, 2 obelisks on the side of Pain for Fem as they engage the last boss. They have the Tank Buster as well as the Caster. So a lot of work here in the Hunters to make sure that they're manipulating their pets properly to ensure that they're going to be taunting off the tank for the Tank Buster, and making sure they're getting the kicks and dodging any of the fire and any of the rockets that are going all over the place. As Seb's dropped low once again. Gotta be really careful there.
Yeah, this can actually cause lots of issues, just because the boss is so immobile. It barely ever moves, just because of the Gatling gun going out and all the other abilities the boss casts. And then you have the Void Weaver that constantly needs to be interrupted, as you mentioned. On the other hand, the boys are now also engaging the boss. They're dealing with 3 awakened mobs on their side, so they even have more things to pay attention to, as Miwo drops really low on Pain for Fem's side, but is able to recover.
Yeah, this is also an awkward situation for the Monk, because Miwo's really low. He's got to be able to bounce back into this one. And it looks like now that they're having some more of the rockets going out, and they're targeting the Hunters, they're getting out of the group more rapidly here. A lot of times, you were seeing those Hunters being a bit closer into the group, having rockets hit the party. And that just kind of stresses the Mistweaver quite a bit more, because they're trying to make sure they're topping everybody off, and they're trying to deal with all that consistent damage. And it's not enough targets to make use of a really good Way of the Crane, for example. 3 targets is really poor to deal with, and it's really poor to be getting good healing out of Way of the Crane. And having to just manually be healing everybody's costing them more damage. So you're kind of having to pick and choose your battles a little bit there. But they did a good job of stabilizing the group, and that's really the hardest part of the fight, is early on, especially when you have obelisks to deal with. Yeah,
I mean, the intermission phase is also it can be dangerous as well, just because this ability where the boss stomps down here does a lot of AoE damage, and then on top of that you have these Sky Scorchers, which do a lot of damage as well, and you have Grievous. So that's why you see everyone dropping so incredibly low here, while the boys, on the other hand, they didn't triggered the intermission phase yet, but they dealt with the Awaken mobs on their side as well. So well done by both of the teams to be able to deal with the Awaken mobs on top of having to deal with the boss. So many mechanics going on at the same time, so well done both teams, as both of them also have a battle rest available in case something goes wrong, but they have to use the engineering rest, which can be hard to use in a fight like this, where constantly there are things happening, you need to move your character, so you can use it during Turtle maybe, and just use an immunity to get the battle rest back up, but outside of that it's going to be very difficult to get a rest through.
That's right, and the boys got a lot of bonus damage onto the boss before he transitioned. He usually transitions at 50%, but they had the Gatling gun go out, and they got another 9% extra damage up onto the boss. But unfortunately, this intermission takes such a long amount of time that on the side of Pain for Femme, 10% left on Mogul Razdunk's mech, as they are done with trash percentage. And Pain for Femme, you know, we've seen it. We saw it in the first series as well, that capitalizing on the mistakes of the boys and having a really unique and very interesting strat for the Motherload as they take game number 1. Or game number 2, excuse me.
Yeah, that is going to be a 2-0 for Paint for Femme, moving them on further into this bracket, and they will be facing Method EU later today, so definitely looking forward to that matchup. And